Hello everyone, this is Professor Sexton with a video lecture on Walt Whitman's poem I Hear America Singing and Cummings' Next to God Across America I poem. Um, Let me begin by bringing up Walt Whitman's poem so that you can see it. And I am not going to read this poem all the way through. I'll make reference to it. What I want to do is I just want to give you the context for the poem and explain to you a little bit about that, because it's a very simple poem in terms of the way that it's written. So when Walt Whitman initially wrote this poem, and when it was first published, it was published in a collection of his called Leaves of Grass, which was published in 1855. Now, I know that on the bottom of the poem, it tells you that this version appeared in 1867, but that was an addition or a revision to the original poem. And the reason why the time period is important is if you know anything about American history, 1855 was just 5 or 6 short years before the Civil War happened, where America fought a war against itself, the North and the South, or the Union versus Confederacy. And it was a war over, depending on to whom you speak to, there are some people said that it was a war of states' rights. Other people said that it's a war over slavery. I tend to say that it was a war for over states' rights to own slaves. Slavery had been a problem in America for quite some time, since the very founding of the Constitution in the country. And the fathers had considered abolishing slavery, but they did not. They had assumed incorrectly that slavery would die a natural death. And as the years of the country continued, new states continued to enter in the discussion of whether those states could have slaves or not, continue to be an issue that it just reached a crisis point. But the signs were in the air before the first shots were fired in Fort Sumter that this had to come to a head. And in a lot of ways, Walt Whitman writing I Hear America Singing was his attempt to, in some ways, to use literature to avoid a war. And what he was trying to do was he was trying to praise everything about America and how it was such a diverse country made up of so many different people, yet people still being a part of this great America country. So in this poem, what he does is he writes about he hears America singing. But if you read through the poem, you'll notice that by and large, what he's really talking about is professions. So if you notice here, I'll just pick one line here. He writes the carpenter singing his, the mason, the boatman, the shoemaker, the woodcutter. So he's actually talking about the different professions that make up the country. And it is a very male-centered poem because most of these people that he speak about here are men. He does mention women, but notice that the women in the poem hold domestic duties. So the delicious singing of the mother or the young wife at work or the little girl sewing or washing. Um, what is interesting about the poem, given that this is a period where slavery was still legal in a lot of the southern states, what is interesting about the poem is that there is no mention of slaves and what they sing. Now, it's debatable why he didn't include them or why he chose not to do this. Some people have said that, in terms of profession, slavery wasn't a profession. Yet at the same time, some people argue, yet those men and women were still doing a lot of work in the country. But also, I think one of the things that you might want to consider is sometimes when you don't mention someone or something, that absence makes that presence all the more significant. And so perhaps it was a time period where that didn't have to be mentioned, that anybody reading the poem during that time period would have thought there's a group that you're leaving out of here. And so it becomes an interesting poem for that reason. Leaves of Grass in itself is great because Whitman is attempting a lot of new stuff in that. And even though we're not going to cover it in this course this semester, a African American poet by the name of Langston Hughes, 100 years later, wrote responses to Whitman's poem, because he has a poem that says "I too," and in Langston Hughes' "I too," he addresses that issue of Black people being absent from this poem. And in Langston Hughes' poem, he sings "I too sing America." So in Langston Hughes' response to Whitman's poem, he's addressing that absence that Whitman leaves out. And that's all that I really want to say about this poem. The next poem I want to talk about is a poem by E.E. Cummins, which is called "Next to God, Next to, of course, God, America, I." This poem is quite interesting. It is also a poem that deals, so like Walt Whitman's poem was a few years before war. This is a few years after a war, because this was first published in 1926. So we're in between World War I and World War II. And this is a poem about patriotism. It's an interesting poem because E.E. Cummins has his speaker speak. And the speaker in this poem, he tends to ramble, and so there's a lot of information that he's saying, and he's bringing together a lot of different things that don't seem to all make sense together. And so in this poem, I will go ahead and read. So let me read this. "Next to, of course, God, America, I love you, land of the pilgrims and so forth. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early, my country, tears of centuries come and go and are no more. What of it we should worry in every language, even deaf and dumb? Their songs acclaim your glorious name by gory, by jingle, by G, by gosh, by gum. Why talk of beauty? What could be more beautiful than these heroic, happy dead who rush like lions to the slaughter? They did not stop to think, they died instead. Then shall the voice of liberty be mute." This is all said very quickly because if you notice, there is no punctuation anywhere in these first 14 lines of the poem, with the exception of the question mark at the end. So there are no periods, no commas, nothing that will have the speaker pause when he is speaking this. And so you run it all together, but you also notice that this speaker is running a lot of different things together that don't always make sense together. I mean, there's like snatches of patriotic songs, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early?" And then another patriotic song, "My country, tears of centuries." And then this speaker is just mixing a lot of things together. And it makes it seem as if what the speaker is speaking here doesn't quite make sense. And you get to the end of his long speech here, and he speaks about the heroic dead. So it's a poem about patriotism, but it seems to be a poem about intense patriotism, where the speaker just doesn't seem to make sense about what he's arguing. It doesn't hold together. And one of the issues that a number of readers have about this poem is the speaker, does the speaker seriously believe what he's speaking, or is the speaker being sarcastic? And the thing is, you just don't know. There's just not enough information in the poem to let you know one way or the other how you read this. And that's why it somewhat makes it an interesting poem, because there are two ways to approach this. And so it's a matter of interpretation and how you want to go to it. What is also interesting about the poem is at the very last line, you get another speaker. And this is someone who's just observed what this past person has said, because this other person said he spoke and drank rapidly a glass of water. That adds another dynamic to this poem, because then you're thinking to yourself, so this person is speaking this to someone else. And then you start to ask yourself a lot of questions. Why the rush? Has he not had the opportunity to speak before and he's trying to get it all out? And maybe because he is trying to get it all out is maybe the reason why he's tripping over himself. Or is it possible that he's thinking out loud and he hasn't really solidified his thoughts just yet? So there's a lot of different ways to approach this poem. And the reason why I included both Walt Whitman's poem and this poem is that they give two different versions of the view of America, and patriotism and what it means to be American. There are numerous other poems that have been written over the years by various poets, American and otherwise, who give interesting takes on what it means to be America, and what it means to be an American. And these are just two such poems that do that. So I just wanted you to read them to get a sense of like a different type of ways that poetry can work compared to the other poems that we've read in the class. Okay, I hope everyone is doing well. Take care. Bye.